I'm Kristine Ballard.
Start again, Kristine. And I'm Melony Smirniotis.
And welcome to ARTnUP, the place where creatives connect, cultivate and support each other's artistic journey. Today, we are talking to the lovely multidisciplinary artist,
Gabby Malpas. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi, Gabby. How are you today?
Oh, lovely to be here. Thanks, guys, for inviting me. What a lovely thing to do on a Thursday afternoon.
In lockdown, everybody.
Yay!
Yeah, certainly lockdown.
Look, the sun is shining. We're in the studio talking to a fabulous artist. What more could you want?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm so pleased to be here. It's actually really nice to be invited to these things, because that means that someone respects what you do so much they want you to talk about it. I think that's really cool. So thank you.
We absolutely do. And we're really excited to get to know you that little bit better and connect you to the audience. So let's get straight into it and ask you, well, you know, I guess that you were always a creative person, but to what extent? Talk us through the back end of your life.
Well, I'm going to start off with that because, you know, we got the list of questions and my short answer was yes. But then since we've been talking, creativity, especially for women of my generation, 55 and up, a lot of it comes from, we learned to be creative because we needed to make do. Or, you know, if I wanted certain things when I was a kid, we didn't have the money to go and buy what I wanted. I didn't, you know, there was no endless money for Barbie dolls or, you know, things that I wanted. So I learned to make them. And my sisters and my mother were creative in that, you know, they made their own clothes. They knitted. My mother spun her own wool. And she was actually an artist in her own right because she was a concert pianist at some point. So it's sort of, and I think a lot of women of my generation and where we've come from is they'll share similar sort of background stories. Creativity, especially amongst females, it sort of comes from a place of need, you know, baking, making domestic things for the home, things you can't afford to buy, so you'll make them or make do.
I think that's the thing, isn't it, Gabby? Make do. And so we kind of think, especially maybe, I'm not sure if this is a female thing, but it's like, well, we just did this and we just did that, rather than,
yes.
Well, I started to do this and I had a great solution. It's like, oh, I just did this, and then the cup, you know, the handle fell off the cup, and then I made a new handle and all that kind of stuff. But what I want to know, Gabby, is when did you decide as you were growing up, when did you decide that you wanted to be an artist? And I suppose, what do you define an artist means in that?
Okay, so my background is probably a little different. And this is where the unusualness of Gabby Malpas comes in that I'm Chinese and I was born in New Zealand in 1966 and adopted and raised by a white family. So I had 9 siblings, and in those days, you know, very little information was given out but I believe amongst the papers that I have not seen yet, it was written that my mother was an artist. Now I've since met that woman and it's a marvelous story all in itself, but she wasn't trained as an artist, but she did some Chinese watercolor workshops, and yes, I've seen some of her work and it's lovely. So my parents, from that day when they read that paper, they said, right, she's going to art school. And I remember about 4, you know, my dad coming home from work with a lot of scrap paper and pencils, and I would go under the table, the big kitchen table, and that was my place, and I would sit there and draw. And I remember very clearly from age 4, you know, people would say, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I'd say, I'm going to be an artist. And I actually think about that a lot. And I think how wonderful it was that they made that choice for me, but I embraced it. So it wasn't a hard thing. But also remarkable, and one fantastic thing I will be eternally grateful to New Zealand for is, you know, in those days, anything was possible. You know, we were a large Catholic household of fairly limited means. We had 10 children. But if you wanted to, you could go on to university and tertiary education because it was free. And my parents, you know, encouraged us all to do that. And we did mostly. And, you know, my parents' own background was that they were Depression era, World War II era people. So, you know, in those days, you left school. My dad left school in Leicester, you know, age 11. My mother left her school in New Zealand age 12 after they did the 11 plus, which older generations know about. So the 11 plus was almost like the university entrance exam, which determined whether you could go on to grammar school or not. Now, both of them I know were very bright and could have, but due to family circumstances, they weren't given that opportunity. So that's why I think how wonderful it was for me to have the opportunities and to be encouraged to take the opportunity of things that just wasn't available to them. Of course, you know, in hindsight, there was no discussion of how are you actually going to eat, darling? But that came later.
Wow, that is absolutely fascinating. I have so many more questions and could easily become derailed. But I do need to move now to where do you make your art? There's all that beautiful art around you. Is your studio nearby? Do you have multiple studios? What's the story with studios?
I have a studio at home, which is an old bedroom. Once stepkid number 1 moved out, I went, yeah, that's my studio. And that's the first dedicated studio I've had. Up until then, it's been beds, on the bed, on desks, on kitchen tables, mostly on a kitchen table. When I was flat sharing in London, I used to have to clean up before the others came home from the pub. You know, so I've always worked around spaces. So I have a studio at home, and it's a dedicated home studio. And I also I rent space at a clay studio in Marrickville, Sydney, and it's called Clay Sydney. And the reason I hesitated with actually paying rent on a studio was literally 2 things. Money, I couldn't afford it. I've always worked around jobs and, you know, always had to find my own way. So I literally couldn't afford to rent a studio. But the other thing is, and I know shared studio places can be really marvelous places for inspiration, but they can also be hell on earth. And I'm quite wary about that, you know, because there's a lot of people involved, different personalities, different requirements, different needs, you know, different egos. You might not get on with someone, you might clash, they might play their music too loud. You know, there's a lot of things that go on in studio. So I've been very wary. But the reason for joining a clay studio is I really don't have any interest in throwing clay at home or firing, etc. I would actually prefer to pay someone to do the firing, manage the kiln and make the glazes. I majored in ceramics, but I'm probably a very terrible ceramicist. For me, it's all about painting it.
Wow.
So Gabby, that brings us to our next point. How do you plan your art? You just mentioned, and I said you were a multidisciplinary artist, and that's because I've seen you. I know that you came from a project management. You did come from a different training. And then what I know of you is that you're this amazing watercolor artist. And now that you're in this clay studio, you actually come from that era. So maybe you can give us a little bit of background into the different types of things and then how you might plan them, because they're quite different mediums.
Yes. Okay, so the first thing I will say is this is an age-old, what would you call it? You probably want to edit this out. So the first thing I would say is I always say this: how do you eat an elephant? Mm-hmm. And it really is this: it's bite by bite, step by step, and you just keep going until it's done. So with my background in project management, I know what it means to be disciplined enough, organized enough to get what you need to do in a day or a week. Now, I split my time between 2 studios, so it does take a little bit of planning. But because this is now my day job, it's easy for me because I know what I want to do and how to do it. So I generally try and spend 3 days a week in the clay studio, and my max is about 4 to 5 hours per day. So because I know, and I've learned over the last year of skilling back up, is that my mojo's gone after 4 hours. And I also have learned there are certain tasks I will do in a week in the studio. So one day might be throwing, the next day might be painting on the ceramics and glazing and firing the next day. Not every day will be the same, and perhaps not every week. And can I say, ceramics is actually quite a physical thing to do. And while I'm getting my skills back, it's been a year after 35 years of a break. You know, sometimes I have no skin left on my fingers. That's a bit of a rookie mistake. So I've got to, you know, there was one bad week when I was gaffer taping, duct taping the fingers so that it wouldn't bleed into the clay. And I thought, no, you really need to get better at this. So that's when I learned, you know, some days you do this and some days you don't. Now, with the painting studio, I generally sit in here 7 days a week. So when I come home from clay, I'll come back into the studio and do stuff. But I also know that those days at the clay studio, my mojo, my creative energy will be spent by the time I get home. So those 4 hours or so I've got left of that day is the time I catch up on emails. I put proposals out. I put catalogs together. There's a lot of work an artist does that no one ever sees, and we don't really talk about it until there's a win. So there's gallery applications, there's prize applications, there's catalogs, potential sales, there's new work that I'm looking at, there's briefs from my licensing coach, there's emails, just sale emails from the website that I have to process or whatever. So that's all admin. And then the other 3 to 4 days, and so that it's a 7-day week for me, is painting. But what I've learned also is, you know, if I'm not feeling it, and some days you really just can't do it, is just relax and let it go. But so I'm going to come around full circle on this because it sounds very lovely and airy-fairy, but I run a business. I'm out of bed by 6 every morning. I make my husband's lunch because that's something I like to do, and it saves us a lot of money. And then I exercise every weekday. So I do try and maintain a training schedule at home, and so I don't even have to leave the house, you know. And it's skipping, it's squats, it's planks, it's because, you know, I'm 55 and I'm active and I'm busy, but I need to maintain my health. So I take care of myself. I cook most of our meals because I know what's in it, and also it's a lot cheaper. How do you think I can afford an overseas holiday? You know, there's things that I do. And then at the end of the day, I try and stop work around 6. And that's turning off, you know, email and stuff. And I'm cooking dinner then. And then after that, it's Netflix and sofa time. So on the sofa, you'll see a lot of, after 7, you'll see a lot of Instagram and social media activity. I'm liking, I'm posting, I'm snarking and whatever, because that's my downtime. But I'm not answering emails. I'm not answering phone calls. People know, do not contact me after this time, because that's my time. So in that sense, yes, it's a job. I'm running a business. It is my job. This is how I make my money. And I have to be disciplined, because, when things went a bit pear-shaped last year, I sort of went off a little bit about the rails, because I thought, oh, what's the point? And I found there was a week or two where I just sort of didn't get anything done because I was all over the place. So the first thing I'd say to anyone is, I'm chaotic at the best of times, but I make a list, and I will have a list. It's as simple as post this, pick up this, pay for this. And when it's done, I tick it off. Oh, it's a good feeling when you tick things off a list.
Yes,
I'm
it feels very productive.
Yeah, I'm very much. I've got lists everywhere. Look, I was just looking at, all the bits and pieces back behind you. Can you tell us, let's talk, because you have sort of touched on materials. What about favorite materials in terms of painting or ceramics? What are your go-tos?
Okay, so for painting, my biggest, most consistent painting tool or material over the 35 years has been Arches paper. Mm-hmm. It is fab. Now, there are a number of people who will disagree, but it suits me, and this is why. Arches, although it's not made in France anymore, it's made in China, but so is your Prada handbag, darling. Arches has a size, which means the color will actually sit on top for a while. And my technique is literally moving a puddle. And if you have to be a little patient, because, if it's very wet, you have to let it dry a bit. But it's got a lovely texture. It's got a lovely color. It's a slightly off-white, not a bright white. It comes in large sheets that I either use as a large sheet or a roll. I use the roll as well. And for me, I think it's the way the surface takes or doesn't take the paint. That's been a big thing for me. The other thing, and this is a bone of contention, and one day I will change, is paintbrushes. I've had really good paintbrushes, and my go-to everyday paintbrushes are the acrylic $3.99 numbers from Senior Art Supplies, or for the really detailed stuff, of which I do a lot, I buy packs of 10 for $2 off AliExpress or Wish. So it's not a cut and dry thing. However, Ed at Pigment Lab in Newtown has really started training me up, if you like, to using the better materials, and I have noticed the difference. So instead of Cotman watercolors, which are and Art Spectrum watercolors, which are the fantastic, really good quality student level, I'm looking at is it Daniel Smith? No, Da Vinci. I'm looking at Da Vinci watercolors, and they're lovely, and the price difference isn't very high when you look at sort of cost per gram, because they're all different sizes. And he's also introduced me to Vallejo acrylics and liquid acrylics. So that means I'm sort of slightly moving across to acrylics, but in a very liquid way. Now, recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, I've started working on canvas. And I must say a custom-made canvas is always preferable every time. but and I know that budget doesn't allow for that. So I do go online and buy canvases in bulk from places like Riot Art and stores. The reason I shifted to canvases is I ship a lot of work overseas, and I ship a lot of work especially to Singapore. And when paper goes to the tropics, especially large pieces, it can mold and it can have foxing issues. So canvases are always better for that sort of scenario. For clay, I experimented a lot over the last year, because when I was at art school doing my ceramics major, I was working in terracotta and the European glaze majolica. So I was glazing and painting over the glaze in a very painterly way, but colourful. So I was painting on pots. This time around, I've sort of, and also within 35 years of research and moving my own sort of art imagery to where I wanted to go, for me, it's really about rediscovering my heritage, rediscovering my roots, my Chinese heritage. And what's that? Well, that's blue and white. That's blue and white porcelain. That's what the West knows. But of course, there's multitudes of different clays that Chinese potters use. But now, at the moment, I'm really loving the mid-fire lumina, which is a white porcelain, and it fires at a slightly lower temperature than the higher porcelain. And it gives this really lovely white glow. And I literally paint on that with just basic cobalt oxide, which is the blue oxide, which made the colors in the blue and white ceramics out of China. And my entire work practice is sort of moving towards, is actually encompassing what I call chinoiserie reimagined.
Mm. So Gabby, that brings us to our next bit, is like, what is the focus of your art? I know that you have a couple of major subject matters. Maybe you could talk us through that.
Yeah. Okay. The focus of my art since 2014 has really been around questioning the very colonialist and European genre and notion of chinoiserie. It's a hugely popular genre, and pieces are priceless, and they're always found in grand homes and castles throughout Europe and the world. Most of the Hamptons' beautiful homes have blue and white porcelain, and it really started at art school, because when I was learning to throw pottery on the wheel, at the time my tutors said, those are classic Han Chinese shapes. So you've got to understand, when I grew up in the 60s, 70s and 80s in New Zealand, it was very white bread. It was very, my own sort of community was a very mostly white community. We had a very few Asian friends. And, as a teenager, just wanting to be like everyone else and fit in, I completely ignored or actively moved away from anything that was Asian. So I hadn't paid attention in all those museum trips, and I never looked at Asian art, and I never looked at Chinese ceramics. And so when my tutor said, they were, I went, nah, get out of here. It's Gabby Malpas. How dare you? And then I went to the British Museum, and then I started looking at museums, and then I traveled through Southeast Asia, in 1988 for nearly a year. And it was, wow, this stuff is. And it was really interesting, because from there, I started to appreciate these absolutely beautiful pieces of art very decorative, very highly skilled, expensive, you know, jewels and ceramics and priceless home furnishings. And I loved them, I coveted them, I tried to copy them. And, you know, whenever I could in markets, I'd buy little trinkets and whatever. So I sort of became interested and started doing my own research. Now, when the internet came and all of the information was available online, that was heaven. And then, you know, museums start putting their collections online, like the Met Museum, you know, puts their entire Asian collection online, and the V&A and the British Museum. Just losing myself for a day on those sites is amazing. But going back to the focus was, while I'm sort of researching and claiming all of this information that I just didn't know, that I should know, I also started to wonder and think about, how does what I do and my art fit into this cultural history, the Chinese art movement that I actually know nothing about. And it was interesting when I started showing work in London, and, you know, always be anonymous because you just put the work in and someone would buy it or not. And, you know, it's a painting by Gabby Malpas. People would often ask the gallery owner, is she Asian? Is she Asian or Oriental in those days by chance? Because even though the painting might be of a fish I saw in Greece, or you know, or European food, you know, a fruit platter or whatever, it was unmistakably Asian. So so that was really interesting. I thought about that a lot. The turning point came for me in 2004 when I met my birth mother. And until then, you know, and this sounds ludicrous, it sounds strange, but I want you to think about this. I did not know my heritage until 2004. Because of where my mother had come from, she didn't come from China. She came from another country. So I always thought I was biracial. And a lot of people, you know, because people always do, they comment on your looks when you grow up. And every year someone says, oh, well, you don't look Chinese to me. You don't look, you know, you look this, you look Polynesian, you look Melanesian, you look, you know. I've been asked if I've been local from every country in Southeast Asia I've visited, India, even Egypt. Someone asked if I was local in Egypt on a bus. So, you know, so finding out my genetic makeup really flipped it for me. And that's when I went, wow, this is it. I know. It was a life-changing experience. And that's when I surged ahead. So what I'm doing right now is I'm developing my own narrative, and I'm developing my own sense of style and who I am, because along the way, and with interactions with a lot of Asian people and a lot of adopted Asian people, and my, you know, understanding of my own community and white circle of friends, is I have never felt like I fit in either world. And a lot of biracial folks feel this, and that was very interesting to me to find out that this is also a thing with them. So, you know, and a lot of Chinese people will look at me sideways because to a certain degree, you know, I'm ignorant of things Chinese people grow up knowing, you know, like, who do you serve first? What sort of food should you have for cooling? What, you know, the cultural things that your mum and dad and your grandparents would have brought you up with, I have none of that. But I can really sing you a really good my old man's dustman rendition, and can tell you every Ealing comedy, movie that was ever made. And, so here's the thing, I'm making up my own. So I also feel like I need to clarify that, I don't have the exclusive license on chinoiserie. I won't diss any European artist who and there are a lot I follow on social media who do chinoiserie pieces or beautiful paintings of Chinese ceramics or porcelain. Heck, I paint in acrylics as well. I use European canvases. It's not about that. But for me and my work, I want to sort of bring the viewer into a place when they can actually think a little bit deeper about what they're looking at. That's a beautiful vase, but there's a story behind that. Or, where did this idea come from? Or why is that very English plant growing out of a very Chinese bowl? Or, things like that. So as an adoptee, as a what we call a transracial intercountry adoptee, what I've realized is my position is actually a very unique one in the world, but there are many of us, and our stories are getting known. So what I'm trying to do is highlight the issues that someone like me faces on a daily basis, and the disadvantage we have in certain situations, but also the privilege that someone like me has had. I have not had to do, even though I'm an immigrant times two, immigrated first to the UK and then to Australia. The privilege I have is that I wasn't a refugee. I didn't turn up with English as a second language. With my education, the opportunities I had in New Zealand, that opened doors to me in other countries. For example, the art school background in New Zealand, I didn't think anything of it, but I often wonder, why is everybody called Camilla and Nigel? Because art school's sort of a bit posh. And then I went to England and I was an art editor at Oxford University Press for a number of years in Oxford. And I realized my dad could never have gone to work there unless perhaps he had a broom in his hand or he was taking deliveries, because it was a class thing. And so because of where I grew up and my art school background, it opened doors for me that was probably denied to my father given his own circumstances. So that's interesting too.
But I think, Gabby, one of the things that we love about artists is that they show us how to see the world differently. That's the bonus, right? The problem for the artist is what are you going to do about it? Like how are you going to interpret that? And often it's a revelation to the artist themselves. It's part of the exciting thing about creating. It's like, wow, look what came out. I didn't even know, and it's emerged. And I think as I've seen the evolution of your work, things have become more intricate and more layered. And I think that's kind of part of the knowledge that you learn as an artist too, isn't it? There's more depth into things. You want to get something more out of the material or the medium, and you experiment a bit more. And this is a thing that happens again and again, is we've heard a lot of the artists that we've interviewed is that they don't need to know the end result. You become, whether we call that artistic confidence or it's just going on that journey, it's like, let's see where it takes me. Let's go and do a bit of investigation and let's put those colors down and see where that takes me. And then other people will be the people to say, oh, wow, that looks like, or that reminds me of. It's like, oh, actually it might me too, but I'm not actually producing something as well. And for everyone at home, Gabby is a world-class art licensor as well. So a lot of her work is applied to ceramics and products like fabrics, and she's around the world. So there's another version of Gabby's work as well that gets interpreted into that. And I think those interpretations along the way are part of the exciting thing. And that for an artist as well, we're not quite sure where that might end off, and we're not even quite sure sometimes what we're trying to say. And doing the artwork is helping us understand ourselves a little bit more. And that's what I see a lot in Gabby's work. They're very intricate. There's a lot of story behind it. There's a lot of meanings, and you can add your own meanings to them as well. And they're also just really beautiful. There's that too.
Gabby, let's shift to social media. I'm very curious. I've had a look at a bit of your social media. It's quite fascinating, and hearing, you know, this story and then aligning that with those visuals. How important is social media to you in terms of the narrative and the conceptual side of things as well?
I think social media for me has been a blessing and a curse. I mean, think about where we were in 1997, or think about where we were in 2004 before Facebook even really took off. And you know, now in 2021, I post something on Instagram and someone from the other side of the world will message and say, hey, is that for sale? You know, the opportunities have just opened up so much. And even, let's go back to 2000, when you're putting your first website together, you paid someone thousands and thousands of dollars to do that. And now you can sign up to Shopify, you know. So the social media world has really changed. I've embraced it because it's valuable. It's an audience that I would never have through other means. A gallery can only do so much because, you know, they're sort of limited to bricks and mortar, and, you know, more and more galleries embracing the online, and some of them do it really well, and I watch that. So I think the social media is a great thing. Where it can become a nightmare is, you know, I've watched a lot of people be cancelled very quickly. And, you know, that worries me in a bit, because, you know, a lot of times we don't know the full story, yet we'll react. And look, I will put my hand up. You know, I'm on a lot of closed books, closed pages where, you know, you're poking fun at people, or you know, it's some nasty stuff goes on. You go, wow. But in another way, the information we have at our fingertips on everything is incredible. And when you think about what happened, especially in 2020, with you know, the Black Lives Matter, the Stop Asian Hate movement, the Trump movement, the various movements all around the world, it was made possible with social media. But back to my own personal relationship with social media is, look, I treat it with a lot of respect. My own social media pages are my own, and that's personal, and I know that probably my personal views are not everyone's personal views, and they shouldn't be, you know. And I will often joke with Kristine, you know, I think Kristine mentioned earlier, you know, Gabby's work is so beautiful and delicate, and then, you know, when you meet me in real life, I'm a sledgehammer between the eyes sort of person, you know. So that's funny. That makes me laugh. But, you know, in 2021, with social media, I'm doing my own thing. And what I mean by that is this, you know, last year, I sort of jumped on the bandwagon of, you need more followers. You need more followers. And you know, and I researched how to do it. And, you know, the tried ways of doing it. And one of the methods was to buy followers, which I don't do. And the other method was, you know, takes a lot of time, but you go in and you like a lot of pages, and then you follow them and you unfollow, and you keep doing that as a sort of as a thing, and until your audience grows. And I actually got called out on that last year. And I followed an artist, then unfollowed him, and then a couple of days later he came on my feed and said, well, just another artist following and unfollowing for likes. And I read it, and yeah, I deleted the mess. But then I thought, actually, you're right. You're right. Don't do that. But I'm talking about me here. This is not, I talk about being honest and being upfront. Well, yeah. So although at the moment I don't have a huge following, not like a well-known go-to artist has a following, I engage a lot with my followers, and I check who follows me. And if someone follows me and they're starting out, or I like their work and they've got not many followers, I'll follow them, or I'll comment, or I'll say something on their feed, because they've taken the time to look at my stuff. So what I always do is, it's you think back to what your mother's told you. How would you like to be treated? If someone has taken the time to leave a nice comment or follow me, best I can do is take a look at their work or say thank you and engage back. So at the moment, I have a really nice little posse of followers, and we talk and we engage, and that's how we do it. 2020, 2021, I've seen a lot of artists do the hard sell on social media, and I understand it. I mean, we're in the business of selling. So I sell art. That's my business. That's my job. That's how I eat. But I'm thinking, a lot of my followers, I don't know how they're going. A lot of them may have lost their jobs. A lot of them may be really struggling with homeschooling. A lot of them just might not be in a good place. So they come to my feed for some joy, and my art's all about joy. So for me to keep pushing the hard sell or whatever, it doesn't sit right with me. So although you will see me promote other people I collaborate with, or mention a sale, or there's things that have just been dropped off at this shop or that shop, I try not to push it too much, because I don't want people to think that they're obligated to buy from me. That's social media for me is about growing my audience, but engaging with them as well. And in these times, I've really felt, what, even if we're doing it tough, where we can, we've got to give a bit more. That's the hard thing about it.
I think everyone's feeling things differently at the moment, and so if your work brightens someone's day, that we'll take that. I think that's probably a good thing. So Gabby, what's one of the hardest things about being a painter? I don't know whether to divide it from COVID or not at this point, because it's all bloody hard at the moment.
Yeah, and we do it to ourselves. And so this is probably going back to Melony's social media comment, this is the curse of social media, because we look at everybody else's lives on social media, and all of the artists I follow, they look fantastic. If you believe it, everybody's selling 10 times better than you. They're getting twice the price that you're getting. They've been picked up by this gallery. They got interest by that gallery. LA's calling, London's calling, Paris is calling. And I'm sitting at home on my milk crate. And we know it's not true. But, I never put the lows down on my social media, because no one needs to see that. So that's where it's quite an unrealistic thing. What I try and do is I do show the disasters sometimes, and I'm very clumsy for beautiful, delicate work. A lot of them, I've had to repaint because obliterated the lot by spilling coffee on it, or, you know, on canvas before it's dry, I've just put my arm and just wiped out 2 days worth of work. You know, I'm not going to post that because I'm too busy swearing my head off. It's the pressure that we probably put on ourselves, and the pressure comes from a lot of things, and it's, you know, it's probably unfair to say we put it on ourselves, because it's a lot of things outside of our control. You know, we've got bills. You know, COVID dried up a lot of our income. So how am I going to pay for the studio? How am I going to buy the materials? How am I going to pay for the shipping to get stuff to a show that may not even be seen or even sold, you know? So there's a lot of anxiety that we have around, because our lives are quite precarious at the best of times.
That's really interesting. It's interesting how you have, you know, that idea with social media as an artist, that everybody's doing so well, even in this difficult time. Everyone's, you know, posting nonstop. But the reality is that so many of us are really struggling. And you mentioned before the homeschooling even. Don't even get me started there. But look, let's turn it back to positive. What's the best thing about being an artist?
It's simply, I am an artist. I am 55 years old and I say I am an artist. Melony, I didn't say that until about 5 years ago. I used to introduce myself as, hi, I'm Gabby Malpas, I'm a project manager.
Yes.
Now I'm Gabby Malpas, I'm an artist.
Oh, goosebumps, Gabby.
And I want to leave you with this, you know. I'm a bit late to a lot of things, but, you know, and giving up work in 2019 for good was really hard, because that was my security. That was, you know, that was my job. That was, a lot of people are defined by their jobs, not really with me, because, you know, I was always at the coalface. But I want to leave you with this. This is my feeling of why I feel so much joy. When I'm gone, people might remember Gabby Malpas, the foul-mouthed, cranky, mediocre project manager. They probably won't. But they might remember Gabby Malpas, who made beautiful things.
Oh, goosebumps again. That's a wonderful answer. Thank you for sharing.
Gabby, where can we see your amazing work?
You can see it on my website.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the best place to see work in progress is Instagram or Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And it's literally Gabby Malpas. Just search Gabby Malpas.
Yeah, we'll list all of those details most certainly. But wow, thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Welcome.
Gabby, it's been a great insight into your perspective on being an artist. I hope it enthuses and excites everybody else out there to go and have a look at your work and have a look at all the stuff that you talked about and what's in your work. And of course, we would love to say, you know, what's going on in the future, but I think it's probably just best to stop it here and say, just stay in tune and we'll update everyone. So thanks again, Gabby. It's been lovely to chat to you today.